esteemed guest here, and Shastri Yanamandraji. He is the grandson of Pandit Kota Venkatachalam, and he's been very close to works of Panditji and has been trying to bring Panditji's body of work into the mainstream of Indic studies for some time now. He feels that Panditji's work in reconstructing Indic chronology, coupled with the social, economic, cultural, and political dimensions, could provide the basis for the development of the one grand narrative that we are all in search of. So I do not see him. I know he's listening to us, but Shastriji, if you can you hear me? Yeah, there he is.
Yes,
Thank you, Shastriji, for appearing on our screens. And
thank you, thank you. That was a
yeah, thank
very
you so much.
generous introduction. Thank
We
you,
look forward
Indic
to begin
Academy,
this.
for this
And
opportunity.
yeah.
Thank you to the distinguished panelists. It's a privilege to share the stage with you. I wanted to ask a simple question. Most people in India relate to um, big stories like the Mahabharata, big historical figures like Adi Shankaracharya, and you have mentioned a couple of those. Over the millennia, could you please show some connections over time, let's say from the Mahabharata days or after that in the medieval ages, maybe towards Adi Shankara as well? This would help people understand the civilizational continuity and integrity over the millennia.
Dr. Kak, before you begin, I just want to give one house rule before you come into the answers. All our listeners and viewers, I believe we have a lot of them here. At this point, you can begin typing your questions, and the team at Indic Academy is going to curate those questions, and we will try to answer every question that we get. So at this point, you can begin writing your questions and sending them to us. And over to you, Dr. Kak.
Yeah, thank you, Shastriji. A very good question about the connections that exist in India's mainland between Kashmir and rest of India. And there are so many of them. In fact, the greatest Kashmiri scholar, Abhinav Gupta's, his own grandfather or great-grandfather came from Kannauj and settled in Kashmir. So there were people moving back and forth in all of India for centuries. And even though, there were regions which had specific languages. So this is one fact. The other is that you also have connections in ideas that arose through agamas. Before that, of course, you had Puranas, which are encyclopedias, and you had the other tikas and bhashyas on the sutra and the Upanishadic literature being created all over the country. But certainly you had other texts also which were pan-Indic, and one of the greatest of them is Yoga Vasishtha, which again scholars believe arose in Kashmir. And Yoga Vasishtha is the second largest book in Sanskrit, next to Mahabharata with about 100,000 shlokas. You have Yoga Vasishtha at about 29,000 shlokas. And then you have Ramayana at 24,000 shlokas. So Yoga Vasishtha is the supreme book on Advaitic view of reality, narrated in terms of stories, which many people consider a scripture in itself, but one can also view it as perhaps the greatest novel ever written. And through its stories, it communicates the most subtle ideas related not only to the external reality, but also the inner space that is within each one of us. Now, another point before I forget, which I want to emphasize, Virendraji spoke about the 36 tattvas, in which Shaiva Darshan of Kashmir is different from Sankhya. Sankhya is 25 tattvas. We can see the antecedents of this in the Vedic literature itself. You have this great dialogue in Brihadaranyaka Upanishad between Yagyavalkya And the student who comes to him and he says, how many gods are there? How many devas are there? And he says 33. And then he says, what are these 33? And he says, you know, you have 8 Vasus, you have 12 Adityas, and you have 11 Rudras. The 11 Rudras, which the Vedic sages speak about, are the 11 phases or aspects of consciousness in their veiling and in their expressive form. It's these 11 Rudras which were added on in their own unique way to the 25 tattvas of Sankhya, which give us the 36 tattvas of Shaiva Darshan or Kashmir Shaivism. So all along in history, as far back as you go, there is this amazing interplay. And 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 as Kashmir Shaivism as being a part of the general tantric world, the tantras themselves, even though they see or it's viewed that they arose of the agamas, but tantric scholars themselves say, well, it's actually all goes back to the Vedas, or you go to Shvetashvatar Upanishad, where similar classification is done. And really there is no distinction that Tantra or the Shaiva tradition is really no different. It's just emphasizing certain aspects of the same big Vedic river. So all connections, all throughout.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Kaki.
Interesting. Thank you so much. We have questions pouring in, and the first question, and very interesting questions, some of them are very interesting, but we'll answer every question. The first question is for Dr. Kar, and this is from Shehjar Safaya from Raleigh, North Carolina. Thank you, Shehjar. And her question is, did the Kashmiri Hindu rulers have family relations with Hindu Shahi rulers of present-day Afghanistan? And could you tell us more about the role of Lalitaditya, King Lalitaditya, in countering caliphate armies? So 2 questions. One, do Kashmiri Hindu rulers have any relations with Hindu Shahi rulers of Afghanistan? And what was the role of Lalitaditya in countering caliphate armies?
Okay, quickly, certainly they had relations, they had marital relations. In fact, the great Queen Bidda was, I believe, a Shahi princess. So there were all these connections. Now, the great Lalita Ditya of the Karkot dynasty, historians accept that in his campaigns to conquer the world as he saw it, he also had a campaign. He did a campaign to Central Asia, to Xinjiang, and he conquered that as well. This is when the Tang Empire had weakened. But as I mentioned in my opening remarks, the Indics, as Buddhists, with a lot of Hindu divinities also thrown in, because you also see Shiva as one of the very important deities all over Central Asia for a long, long time. Shiva and Uma and Narayana and even Krishna. So you had the whole Xinjiang as a cultural area where people used Indic languages. There were also Shaka languages in Central Asia. And you had Buddhism, but you also had what we would now call Hinduism or Sanatan Dharma or Shaivism, which were a part of the general cultural river in those countries. And certainly Lalitaditya's campaign to Central Asia must have been partly motivated by actual desire to be connected to people who, in my own phrase, was the twin of Kashmir. That Central Asia was a geographically or culturally a twin of Kashmir.
Okay. Thank you so much. And the second question that I have is, second very interesting question, and this is for Virendraji. Virendraji, if you could unmute yourself. This is from Amit Zuchi in Melbourne, Australia. And his question is, did the white Huns, the nomadic people who lived in Central Asia, Did they, when they invaded Indian subcontinent, did they get influenced by Kashmir Shaiva traditions? Because according to him, many of the Huns seem to be Shaivites by the time they reached Indian subcontinent.
Actually, I have seen this on my WhatsApp also this message, because I have the literature of Kashmir Shaivism, the historical aspect. It is very important. Let us talk of Kumar Jiva, the 4th century, whose father also was a scholar of Agamas, and he was creator of what's called Lotus Sutra today, Shokagai movement, and there are a lot of Shaivites. They had influenced Buddhism. In fact, that's a source of Mahayana Buddhism. And White Huns, they're all White Huns. That's the famous was Hyun song. When he came to main India, he stayed for a couple of time, good time in Kashmir. And he had a great impact on the Kashmir Tantras, like Malini Tantra. This Krama system was very popular. It was very subtle and profound systems. He had a deep impact. This is what I understand. And of course, his purpose was to translate the Buddhist scriptures into that local language. He took the scriptures from India and to understand the Buddhist scriptures, and he found a different knowledge in Kashmir altogether. And definitely there was a good impact.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. This is a very interesting question, and I would like both of you to take it, and probably in just one sentence an answer can be given, and I'll try to answer it myself as well, because there can be multiple answers to this. Anna Solis, she's a journalist, and she's asking, if Kashmir is the crown of India, what is the jewel in the crown? Dr. Kak, you want to take this? If Kashmir is the crown of India, what is the jewel in the crown?
Okay, maybe the question is, what is it that makes Kashmiri approach to civilization or culture unique? I think it is a special eye. It's an aesthetic eye. It's an ability to balance opposites. And that's what shows up in literature, in sculpture, in music, in a variety of fields that emerged out of Kashmir. It's really a sense of beauty. And the whole discipline of Dhwani, the aesthetic theory of Dhwani, that it's not cleverness that makes for the value of literature or a painting, because you can also be clever. You can try to impress somebody through your cleverness, but it's your ability to communicate something infinite and transcendent, so that the viewer or the listener doesn't push back. If you try to teach somebody down, the person would push back. But if you indirectly communicate a resonance which inspired you, and you're trying to get the viewer connected to the same resonance, that is when you have found the secret to what is beauty, what is aesthetically valuable. I think it's that eye which makes the Kashmiri approach to culture and literature unique.
I know. I would interpret this question a little differently, because you've already answered it the right way, I would say. But if the question was, if Kashmir is the crown of India, then who is the jewel in that crown? I would say Abhinav Gupta, because I think at one point he was, to this day, I think he's Kashmir's greatest export to rest of the world. So I would, it's just, as I said, there are no right answers to this. But quickly, Virendraji, how would you answer that? If Kashmir,
I will agree with you. Abhinav Gupta is the jewel of Kashmir. The jewel will be Abhinav Gupta.
You would agree with that?
Jewel will be Abhinav Gupta, yes.
You would agree with that. There's another question, and for this I would go to Dr. Kak again. He says, and this question is being asked by Vivek Gupta. The question is, how can we share this history of Kashmir that we have revealed today, that we've been talking about today, with the colonized people of present day Pakistan, especially northern Pakistan, who are Muslims now? I don't know if the colonized is the right word to use in the correct context, but we get what he's trying to say. He's trying to say, how can we share this history of Kashmir with present day Pakistanis, because a lot of them do not accept this history. They do not accept their own history. They do not accept that they have anything to do with the subcontinent. They think that on 14th August 1947, a blood transfusion happened and they all got Arab blood for some reason. They do not even accept that they are from the subcontinent. But be as that may be, how would you think, what is the way, if there were some people who are interested, how should we share this history of Kashmir with Pakistan?
I think it's a general challenge related to how do you deal with the past? Because many places in the world have a problem with their own history. And I suppose now we have technology, we have decentralized technology of the internet, for example, and other media, which make it possible to present alternative and true narratives to all people. And I believe that every human being wants to know the truth. And if an attempt is made to present the truth in a non-threatening way, people would come to it. And if, for example, people were to know that all of modern science is based on quantum mechanics, from quantum mechanics you get chemistry, from chemistry you get biology, from biology you get brain science, and the creator of quantum mechanics, an Austrian named Erwin Schrödinger, himself was inspired in his own autobiography, he mentions it. He was inspired by Vedanta, by the Upanishadic Mahavakya, as he claims in his autobiography, I am Atman Brahma, that quantum mechanics is consistent with Vedanta. If people were to know it, perhaps they would become curious and would want to find out what is this Vedanta after all, or what is this Kashmir Shaivism? And maybe our ancestors were not all seized of darkness. Maybe there was something. So you got to open some windows. And I think we should take the high road, present the story as often as we can, in as non-threatening a way as we can. And I'm sure eventually everybody loves beauty, everybody loves knowledge, every human being, even animals, a dog wants to see a sunrise or a sunset. Every human, every sentient being wants beauty. So we have to keep on trying.
Thank you so much for that. The next question is for Virendraji. Virendraji, this is Damini from New Jersey. Her question is, what is the main differentiation in Kashmir Shaivism that makes it different from other Shaivite philosophies? Maybe one or two main differentiators. All this while you were telling us what is common between all of them, but what is the main differentiator? If you could give us one or two between Kashmir Shaivism and other Shaivite philosophies in rest of India.
In fact, I described the four broad categories of Shaivism. Let me talk of the main differences. Shaivism, Kashmir Shaivism based on totality. Everything is divine. Good is divine, bad is divine, everything is divine. In fact, there is no negative word. That's why we say Maya is Shumai. Maya is Shumai. Maya is created by Lord Shiva himself to run the play of world. So it is not to be that Jagat Mithya, no, Brahman Satya Jagat Mithya. No, Jagat is also Shiva and Brahman is also Shiva. So this Kashmir Shaivism speaks on totality. Second, that's why Kashmir Shaivism we say is divine life and material life is but one. That is the first message. Second message is that we can realize the God in this very life and now. A very simple process that from the realm of action, the realm of inner, go inwards and connect to the divine. It's based on 100% divine grace. We can get transformed only by divine grace. So I'll say two things, that Maya is Shumai and second is Anugrah, It's only through Anugrah we can realize the God. That's the basic emphasis of Kashmir Shahis.
Yeah.
May I?
Anugrah is, yeah, Anugrah is such a beautiful word because even in Kashmiri, we use the word Anugrah quite a bit. I mean, we have some Kashmiri speakers here. And my grandmother would often tell me, often use that word Anugrah, and she would say, for anything I would do, for if I would go out for an exam, if I would go out for to do anything, well, she would say that you need God's Anugrah. So I guess she was getting it from what Virendraji said. Dr. Kak, you wanted to add something?
Just briefly, just to add to what Virendra ji mentioned, the major difference is that uh, in the Kashmiri view, this embodied world is also an embodiment, or the world, the actual world is also an embodiment of Shiva. And therefore, this is not to be taken as something that you want to run away from. In other words, Kashmir Shaivism is an approach, is a Vedantic approach, Advaitic Vedantic approach, where you can participate fully in the world as it is. You don't have to leave the world and become a sannyasi to find the deepest truths. So you can find the deepest truths while living in the world. So I think this is the major distinction. I don't think it is a very deep distinction. It's a distinction uh, more of style, more in an attitude that look, just as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, that you can't run away from karma, you can't run away from action. So you cannot, even if you went to the forest, you can't run away from it. So you better enjoy the beauty. The world itself is beautiful. It is an expression of the goddess, and you can participate in it and be also informed of the deepest insights by it.
Interesting. I have another question from Vijay Kumar Dar. His question is, and Dr. Cox, since you're here, you may try to answer that. It's a short, pithy question, but I don't know if the answer will be as short. The question is, do you believe that Kashmir will ever rediscover its ancient civilization?
Oh, absolutely. I am a optimist. I think that the world over the next few decades is going to change much more than all the changes that have occurred in the past few centuries for a variety of reasons, partly due to technology, AI. There are going to be tremendously disruptive forces at work, and the coronavirus is just a preview. And this, of course, nobody was expecting, but there are other things that are going to happen. And in that disruption, during that disruption, people would then want to ask questions about meaning and who they are and want to be connected back to their history. And I think that will change. I think people all over, including people in Central Asia or in Pakistan or in Afghanistan and other countries, would want to revisit and embrace all the beautiful that was a part of their own history, and certainly not and reject what was not beautiful, because every society has a mix of this and that. But I think all what we've been talking about is truly beautiful. It's beautiful not only at a regional level of Kashmir and India, it's beautiful at a universal level, and that's what almost everybody, discerning people, acknowledge that. I think people will want to and will get connected.
We have a lot of questions coming in, so we will have to keep our answers short so that we can take more questions. Virendraji, here is a question for you. The question is, Sharda Peeth, as you know, had the presence of, and this is asked by Shashank Davangire, his question is, Sharda Peeth, which evidently had scholars from all parts of South Asia, did that help in spread of Kashmir Shaivism across India, or was it more like exchange of ideas where the ideas from other parts of India also influenced Kashmir Shaivism? So we've talked about how Kashmir Shaivism influenced other parts of Indic thought, but did the thoughts that were coming from other parts of South Asia also influence Kashmir Shaivism and change it? We'll have to keep our answer really short and move on to other, if you could please.
Actually, scholars would learn the great wisdom in Banaras. That was the learning center. From Banaras, they could go to Sharda Peeth for subtle realization, for the higher sadhanas, not only of Kashmir Shaivism, Agamas, even Buddhist scholars also were there. So it was an interaction, we can say it was a center of interaction also. And that's the Sharda Peeth was called the highest learning, because you will be taught practical sadhana in Sharda Peeth.
Yeah.
That
So
was it.
next question, and since you're here, I'll ask you this quick question. It's from Shori Banai. He says, what are the remaining manifestations of Kashmir Shaivism in today's valley? Are there any manifestations left? How do we practice Kashmir Shaivism today in Kashmir Valley? Now that we're not in Kashmir, but Kashmir.
It doesn't matter, because I do interact with who are these practitioners in Kashmir Shaivism also. The great practitioner Pranath Kohlji, I wish people take advantage of his presence. Then Prabhaji is too old, and you can always practice Kashmir Shaivism. Everybody is very welcome to Kashmir Shaivism. We have to go. There are basic principles, which is announced by Shiv Sutras. Shiv Sutras gives the guidance how to practice Kashmir Shaivism and Vijnana Bhairav meditation, Vijnana Bhairav Tantra. There are subtle techniques. Everything is available. You should only have a desire.
But are there gurus available? Are there gurus available right now to teach Kashmir Shaivism right now? That was the question. Are there any gurus available?
Guru is correct. Guru is within you, but of course their number is very less now. Prabhaji also used to give Diksha.
Yeah.
And Pranath Kohlji, there are people all over the world. They are coming in summer. If you see in Ishwar Ashram, our world, I don't know, this year maybe because of Corona, people, there's not much of it. But summer people are coming to, they sit in the Ishwar Ashram also. They learn Kashmir Shaivism. It is growing, and it's growing day by day. I see a lot of this thing.
Yeah.
By the way, we also teach the practical side. That is also one thing. We teach the practical. We call it level 1 program, level 2, like that. We teach basic scriptures. Life and material life is one. Basically, we impart Tattva Gyan and Shiv Sutra and Vijnana Bhairav. We can start with that.
So anybody who is interested. Another question, Dr. Kak, this question is, I'll put it to you. It says, it's a cheeky question. It says, we did not quite resolve the original question raised by Sunanda. How far in history do we go to claim a plot of land? Kashmir was Muslim dominated before 1947, perhaps since 1600s. What gives us the legitimacy to go back beyond 1600? I don't think he has the dates right, but his question is, what gives us the legitimacy to go to pre-Islamic period? Should we even go to it?
Well, I don't know what that question really means, but certainly Kashmir has remained connected through ups and downs of its history. There was a continuous, cycle of scholarship and manuscripts and scholars working on it. And even Kashmir Islam, the Rishi Islam, for example, the Nanda Rishi, for example, one of the very leading lights, they were inspired by Malleshwari and Shaivism. So they were trying in the general public. In fact, one could say that politics in Kashmir, the Islamic politics in Kashmir before 47 was an interplay of three groups. One was the general Islamic population, which remained connected to their own traditions, which had elements of their pre-Islamic past. And then there were the Orthodox mullahs in Srinagar. And then there were some people who wanted to be more open and be leftist and so on. So there was an interplay. And perhaps this interplay would have resolved itself and found a healthy expression. But sadly, Kashmir became a prisoner to this politics which was used by Pakistan to destabilize India, especially in the 80s and 90s. And therefore, there were forces which were much bigger than that of Kashmir. For example, I can tell you, when I was growing up in Kashmir, Kashmir was the safest place anywhere one can imagine. I remember when I was a young kid in Kulgam, I remember my father telling me one day that, look, in the last year, in the whole of the Kashmir Valley, there was just one murder. And there was also a murder of passion. But things have changed greatly because outside forces have come in, which have destabilized Kashmir, as outside forces have destabilized many other parts of the world. And maybe that is a part of this process of globalization. But now there are new forces at work, which I alluded to in the beginning, just a short while ago, that disruptive forces will perhaps turn the clock backwards, and people would want to be connected to their own traditions in a more healthy way. And possibly that would be a resolution to this problem and answer to your question at the local level.
Okay. And maybe Virendraji and you, between the two of you, one of you can decide how to answer this and who can answer this. Can you, and quickly, can you share the contribution of Kashmir to Yuddha Tantra, war strategies? Is there any contribution of Kashmir to Yuddha Tantra or war strategies? Either of you can take that question.
Subhaji, you start.
Oh, well,
Yuddha
no,
Brahmastra, this, because I have seen from Andhra scholars, Andhra and other things, this Dhanur Vidya and other things. I have attended some sessions.
well, there obviously was a lot of theorizing, and I personally am not knowledgeable, but these texts often speak in very general terms, and then there were further commentaries on it, which is where they became of greater value. For example, as you know, there is this famous episode in the Mahabharata of this Chakravyuhu, where Abhimanyu, I suppose, he goes in and he doesn't know how to get out. So there are all of these theorizing, but I personally am not knowledgeable about all of that.
Okay. And here is, and I'm going to ask both of you to give me two books, because there the question is, please do suggest to us the writers we could read to understand more about history of Kashmir, for example, Abhinav Gupta. So if you can give me two sources or two books that you recommend, Subhaji, and then Virendraji, if you can give me two books that you recommend, and then we can move from that. What are, if somebody is starting to read about history of Kashmir, what should they go back to, primary sources?
Well, there is, of course, Raj Tarangani, the big history book, which was written about 1,000 years ago. But I would also recommend, and there are very good translations available, the Yoga Vasishta, because in my view, that is the greatest book, greatest novel ever written. I would recommend Yoga Vasishta. It's a very eminently readable. And then people who are interested in Kashmir Shaivism, there were all these translations which were done by Jaidev Singh for many decades, published by Motilal Banarsidass, and I'm sure those books are still available. And there's a lot of stuff which is probably freely available on the internet.
Virendraji, two books that you
I will
would
recommend two books. Of course,
Okay.
Raj Tarang is a wonderful book, History of Kashmir from Mahabharata starts, ages. I will recommend two books. Number one book is Abhinava Gupta by Dr. K.C. Pandey. It was out of print, but I also requested them publishers, please publish it. It is now available. Chokamba Sanskrit Pratishthan. Abhinav Gupta's history. It gives a wonderful knowledge of Tantra in English language. We are lucky to read in English language about Kaula Tantra, Krama system, historical aspect. It gives wonderful book, little thick book. And then for the guidance of Kashmir Shaivism, very popular book from Swami Lakshmanju, Kashmir Shaivism, The Secret Supreme. These are all available books.
Okay.
Jaidev Singh learned with Swami Lakshmanju. Now, luckily, we got direct books from Swami Lakshmanju. There are many books, Vigyan Bhairav, Shiv Sutra himself from Lakshmanju, but these are very easy books. You will get great interest in Kashmir Shaivism by reading this book, Secrets.
Okay.
So, Swami sir.
I have time. I'm only going to be able to take two questions. And after this, I'm going to go to Sri Harikiran Vadlamaniji, who is with us here, and I'll introduce him in a bit. So after two questions, I'll go to him. This is, Subaji, if you can answer that. Teji Singh from India, America today. And she says she's an Orthodox Christian, FYI. We really don't need to know that, Teji. That does not matter here. It's just a question. She is saying Kashmiri Pandits came to ask help from ninth Sikh Guru, Tegh Bahadur, for help so that they could stop Mughal Emperor Aurangzeb from converting them to Islam. The guru was tortured and beheaded, but it stopped that conversion. So Teji, I apologize. Teji is a he. I apologize. I was not sure about that. So Teji is asking why no mention. I'm not sure where he wants a mention of this, but maybe he's saying that why are history books not, why do they not talk about, it's just a folklore, but why do history books not talk about this incident? I suppose this is the question. Subhashi, if you could answer that.
Okay, the answer is depends upon what kind of a history book you go to. Often comprehensive books do mention it, but generally now leftist historians don't want to talk about it because they say incidents such as this represent a communalization of India's history. So we're going to leave this out because this pits one community against another. So I think it's leftist historians who would eschew any discussion of it. But older texts, and certainly Kashmiri scholars themselves who have written histories of their own community, do always mention it.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to add.
Please go ahead. Please.
On this, the Kashmiri Pandit who accompanied Tej Bahadur, and he joined Guru Gobind Singh and he gave Shahidi. He became the Sikh warrior and he died for the Sikh cause also. That I think that people are aware. It's very popularly known that.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, Virendraji. Thank you for letting
yes, it's very
I personally wasn't aware of that. I will just take one more question because I have to go to Harikiranji after this. And this question is from Mohan Gatge, and it's I'm not quite sure what he means. He says, in what time period of history, the word is dilution, I'm not sure if that is the right word, the dilution of Kashmiri Hindus happened, and who is responsible, both religious and political leadership? I think what Mohanji is trying to say is that when did the dwindling of population happen? At one point, obviously, Kashmiri Hindus were about 100% of the population. When did the dwindling happen, and the kind of dwindling that has happened in Kashmir, that a lot of people want to call it genocide, because from 100% to the time the 7th Exodus happened in 1989, there were just 5 to 7% Kashmiri Hindus left. So I suppose if you can both answer, Subhaji, you first, that when did this serious dwindling of numbers happen? It couldn't just be conversions. Not many of them must have been killed as well. And when did that happen? When was the time period? What was the time period that saw the most persecution of Kashmiri Hindus?
Well, as you said, this is the seventh major episode. The very first major episode is supposed to have been Sikandar Butchikan. Butchikan meaning iconoclast. Butt from Buddh, because when Central Asia and Northwest India became Islamicized, in many parts of those regions were the Buddhists, and the Buddhists in their monasteries had big images of the Buddha. So destruction of the images was called Butchikan, to destroy Butts. Butt also means an image, therefore. So it was, I think, the grandson of the very first guy who seized power from the very last queen of Kashmir.
Shamir.
And he did a general massacre or genocide, and according to popular belief, only 11 families were left. And when I was growing up, my father and mother and grandparents used to tell me that the Kaks were one of those 11. So that we have survived. So I must also work as hard to survive in the decades ahead. But there have been other episodes like this. And, a community which has gone through a similar history is the Yazidis in northern Iraq, who claim to have undergone, I don't know, 20, 30, 50 such such episodes, including one very recently, 8 to 10 years ago. So, so a long period. Now, after the very first extremely serious episode, the son of that king was a fellow called Zainul Abidin, whose life was restored by his Hindu Vaidya. So after that, he became kind and he said, you can come back in. And a lot of people did stream back in. People were fled. But you know, the population remained very, very low, and it was about 5-6% in 1990. But now it's almost gone to 0%. There are just a few thousand people left in the entire valley, and they're also under tremendous pressure.
Yeah, I always struggle with the word genocide when it is used for my people, and I somehow don't want to use it. And a lot of people do use it, but I don't know what more is a genocide than a population going from 100% to near 0% in the valley now. I don't know if a cultural genocide, numerical genocide, but I just get very nervous about, I get goosebumps when I even talk about that word. But we are running out short of time, and this last question that I'm going to, that we have covered already, and so I'm just going to give her a brief answer myself. This is Ravali Rapaka. She says, what changed after the Muslim invasion in Kashmir? Roughly, what changed after Muslim invasion was 7 exoduses of original Aboriginal people of Kashmir, Kashmiri Hindus, Kashmiri Pandits. So systematic persecution happened, and the fact that we are talking here today and trying to reminisce who we are is the result of the Islamic invasion in Kashmir. So a lot has happened. The character has changed. I think if there is anything that we need to take away from this conversation is that how can societies change when demographics are reduced? If there is one thing that we can go back and think about, and in a very scholarly way, that what happens to the societies when numbers are completely reduced like this over a period of 400, 500 years. As Hindus, we understand that time is cyclical, and 400, 500 years means nothing. It is just, a cycle of time. But in 400, 500 years, here we all are talking about, even I don't know a lot of about who I am, and I learned from these scholars today. But I can assure you that there are many of us who don't at all understand who we are, where we have come from, because we have been uprooted so much, 7 times at least, and we are hoping to go back, never to be uprooted again. We don't know when that will happen. But with that, I'll end this question answer session. We have already gone, we have a lot of questions. And before this started, we had already said, in fact, Subhashji had suggested this, and I would suggest this to the Indic Academy members, that this was a very broad overview of history of Kashmir and Kashmiri Hindus. So taking from it a few strands, what Virendraji and Subhashji said today, we can maybe have a few more webinars if people are still interested, and take a few specialized topics and talk about those. And the idea today was to give you a broad overview, and we can take it from here and that is a suggestion from me to Indic Academy members. Subhashji, if you want to make a last comment, because we'll have to end in a little bit.
Very brief comment on Hari Kiranji's first message on that book by William Sage called Brahma's Curse. This is all cherry picking. You can take one story and you can pick this and that. And people like William Slade would like nothing more than people getting worked up, because any publicity is good publicity. If I were you, I would totally ignore this, because I've seen other stuff by people which is of very poor quality. Certainly, maybe one person can take a look, a hard look at it, but I wouldn't want to give it any publicity. In my view, I think that'll just be the wrong thing to do.
I'm looking for at least a rebuttal kind of a thing. It looked very, very, I mean, when you read that, your blood boils saying that, look, how can you, somebody even, have this kind of a perspective? Subhash Kakti, you know that they are at it. They're extraordinarily creative. They're very creative, innovative.
But, yeah, I wrote an essay on it for medium.com called A Scandal of Indology. And you look at some of the stuff which is so bad, and there is a clear ideological position that Indians cannot speak for themselves. It's we who shall speak for them. They don't have any authority to interpret their own books. I think the battle has been joined, and I think this is a sideshow, and probably we did not give any importance to it. But the stakes are quite high, and there's this talk right now in the U.S. BLM, Black Lives Movement, of white privilege. If there is one area in the entire world where there is white privilege, it's Europeans and Americans telling Indians that you don't have the right to interpret your history. You don't have the right to interpret what the Vedas are and what the other texts are. And in that article, you'll see quotes by professors saying that we want to freeze out Indian scholars. So if that is what the situation is, I think we have to know what the parameters of this battle are, and we have to now use Yuddha Tantra properly. We have to find out what these Yuddha Tantras are and find out how this battle should be fought.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Subhashi. That is actually a positive note to end this on. And Virendraji, thank you so much. You joined us from India, and I mean this must be early morning for you. But thank you so much for joining us and enlightening us on so many interesting issues. I personally learned a lot today. Thank you so much. Subhashi, always a pleasure to listen to you. Always, it's always enlightening. I always take away so much every time I read your writing or I hear you talk. It is always a pleasure. And thank you to Indic Academy for giving us this opportunity to talk about ourselves. And thank you to all the viewers and listeners and everyone who asked questions. I tried to put in as many questions as possible. I hope your questions were answered. Thank you so much for being with us today. And with this, I thank you all. Namaste. Namaskar.